Welcome and thank you for joining us as we discuss licensing your intellectual property. We'll learn the when, the why, and how to license your intellectual property or IP. This afternoon, I have a distinguished and accomplished panel of subject matter experts who will be joining us to share their experiences within the world of licensing and all of the possibilities related to the types of intellectual property one can license, as well as sort of a future look in terms of licensing. Our first guest I would like to bring to the stage, the virtual stage, if you will, Miss Chinwe. Chinwe, please turn your camera on and introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone. My name is Chinwe Ohanale. I am an entrepreneur, a content junkie, as well as an attorney. My expertise is in business law and intellectual property, and I'm the founder of Ohanale Law Firm, which is a boutique legal practice that serves purpose-driven creators, innovators, and entrepreneurs. In addition to that, I do quite a bit of education through different trainings, workshops, as well as speaking at conferences. I also write some of my thoughts about industry and intellectual property on my blog, The Content Biz. And in addition, I recently began working with the Michelson Institute of Intellectual Property. And in that role, I'm really working to foster partnerships and ecosystems driving, the sort of success of entrepreneurs, creators, and entrepreneurs through IP education, and just making sure that that information is out there. So I'm really excited to be here and hopefully have a really interesting conversation about licensing IP.
Awesome. Thank you, Chinwe. Our next panel member is Mr. Warren Tuttle. Warren, please introduce yourself.
Thanks, Cherise. My name is Warren Tuttle. Really happy to be here on this panel, this terrific panel. I have been helping inventors for many, many years. I served as the president of the largest 501c3 nonprofit inventor education group, the United Inventors Association, for many years. I serve on the National Pro Bono Advisory Council and also on the Council for Innovation Inclusion, CI Squared. I also run open innovation programs for several large companies, including publicly traded Lifetime Brands, the largest housewares company in the world, actually. And I wrote a book called Inventor Confidential, which goes into licensing a lot. I've done over 150 licensing deals, which have generated over $1 billion in sales. So I've been through the ins and outs. So however I can be of help today, please put me to work.
Awesome. Thank you, Warren. Our next panelist is Daniela. Daniela, please introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me. So my name is Daniela Zacon, and I have a slightly different background from the other members of the panel. My background is actually in marine biology, and then I went back to school to study environmental studies and business management. My area of focus is on creating businesses that have a low carbon footprint. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Upwell Cosmetics, and we have the exclusive rights to a patent bundle from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, which is one of the leading oceanographic institutions in the world, and they co-own our patents with Western Washington University. And the bundle includes some process patents as well as field of use patents, which basically states that our company is the only company that can manufacture and sell algae wax, which we are using to replace petroleum wax in personal care and cosmetic products. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you all for introducing yourselves. And I'll use this time to give a little about my background and how I've come to work with you guys today. I am, as Deepak described, I'm working as a senior advisor to the Undersecretary of Commerce for Intellectual Property and director of the USPTO, where I am working on with a portfolio of initiatives and projects around increasing intellectual property access, education, and transactions within the broader community, specifically working on or connecting with under-resourced communities such as women, people of color, HBCUs, and very interested in making sure that intellectual property education and access is available to everyone. My background started as a patent examiner in Technology Center 1600, where I examined innovations in the bioaffecting compositions art area, as we reference in the patent world. After leaving the patent office, I worked in the private sector doing licensing, commercialization, technology transfer, before coming back into the federal space with NIH just prior to my role here at the USPTO. I too am happy to be here and happy to engage you guys this afternoon. So as our panel is titled, we are really going to start with the basics, and that's where I would like to start my interactions with you guys. Warren, you probably are the one that has the most experience of all of us, and so I'd love for you to start with really the basics, answering the question, what is licensing? I think you're muted.
I'd like to say rookie mistake, but I should know better. Thanks. So great place to start. Licensing very simply is the art or science of getting your product or your technology to market through others. There is a path, obviously, of going to market directly, which is quite complicated. It can involve a lot of investment and risk. The easier and simpler way sometimes is to license to others. It could be a company, it could be a distributor, it could be a large entity, it could be an individual, but someone that gives you help along the way. And typically, though, when people license your product, they want some sort of collateral or skin in the game from you, and that typically is intellectual property. So that's why we're here today, and I'd say that's a basic definition.
Awesome. Chinwe, you work with a variety of clients who come to you with issues, questions, opportunities, if you will, assets that cover a spectrum of intellectual property topic areas. What would you say is really a good definition of what licensing is? And I would like for you to use that as a launch pad into what can be licensed.
I think that's a great question. So yeah, a lot of the small business owners that come to me, they come with either a business that they've sort of started and they're excited about, or an idea and they're not entirely sure what it is that they've created, other than, somebody out there wants it. So usually we start by identifying what the assets are. So someone may come in and say, I have this course that I've created. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but I know that it's important and it's different from everything else that's out there, right? And so we parse out, what is that course? What is the bundle, right? So if it's some audiovisual content, written handbook or something, I'm looking at, okay, there's some copyright there. If it has a name that is recognizable in the market that people are, going to look at and say that has value and I can trust that source, you may be looking at a trademark. If you're teaching or you have a unique approach to something, you've developed a tool or a way of doing things that is unique, right? You might be looking at a patent. So I think that the most important thing is coming in and being able to parse out what are these different assets that you've built, and figuring out what bucket it goes into. Then in terms of, what can be licensed, I think ultimately it's a question of, and I'll take a step back. Just because you create something and you can register it does not mean it has commercial value. So I think that that's something that really needs to be teased out. I can draw a stick figure right now and copyright it. It doesn't mean that someone's going to give me money for that stick figure, right? I can name a course something, but it doesn't mean that someone's going to buy it at a sort of premium price, because I think it's a premium price. So it's one thing to create something and register it, which is sort of the foundation. You have to have something that's protected, registered, so that you can leverage licensing, but it has to have some kind of market value, some kind of commercial value for someone to say, hey, that's something that I can build upon. That's something I can collaborate with someone on. That's something that I can turn into a product or a service that, has some ROI. So I think that's a really critical piece of, that conversation, what can be licensed.
Excellent question. And you touched on so many key areas, and some of which I will parse out as we proceed in the conversation. But one of those pieces I would love to sort of drill down on, and this is where Daniela will come in. You mentioned in terms of the types of assets you can license. One of those things was a patent or our patents. And I think that's where Daniela comes in terms of what she used to start her business. So Daniela, can you speak to us about how you found this patent, or did the patent find you?
Yeah, I'd be delighted to speak to that. And before I kind of get into that, I also think it was really important to point out the kind of need, because when you are coming with something novel, which is the reason that can be patented in the first place, you really do need to kind of do your research and see, are the consumers actually going to need this? Are there any regulations in place already? There's going to be a steeper learning curve. So for us, talking to customers was really, really important. The way that we actually came about our IP is maybe a little bit of a different story than others. I'm not entirely sure, but I happen to live in the village where the institution is located and where the inventors did the research, made the discovery, and filed for the patent. So I was already somewhat aware that there was a lot of amazing discoveries in this town, and that I really wanted to find something that I could commercialize. When I initially was brought into the project, the inventors were making one product, just a lipstick with algae in it. And that was great. It showed that it worked. But what we did was then we went out to the market to really, really understand, talk to brands, talk to customers, and see, is there a need for algae wax? It's a totally new thing that no one had ever heard of. And what we discovered was, yes, absolutely, because the other waxes in the market come from petroleum, which are from fossil fuels and, cause carbon dioxide. There's plant-based waxes, which are contributing to deforestation. So we found there was an immense need for some kind of sustainable alternative. No wax innovation had happened in a number of years. So we really found this incredible need and opportunity. And it was an honor to then work with the tech transfer department, which you guys have more experience and I'm sure we'll speak on, and to really be able to take this completely new, novel, discovery out into the world.
Awesome. And thank you so much for covering that, Danielle. And again, just from the sort of the baseline questions, we've uncovered and identified that there is a wide range of intellectual property assets that can be leveraged or licensed or used in some form in transactions. And so, which brings me then to sort of drilling down a little bit more, sort of getting to the nitty gritty, if you will. And Warren, I'll throw this question to you. What, in your experience, what are typical licensing terms that you've seen or you've negotiated? And then sort of as a part B to that, do those terms differ based upon the type of intellectual property you have?
Yeah, great question. And the answer is yes. So I'm enjoying listening to other panelists today because it does round out the conversation. And I guess kept going through my head as they were both speaking about consumer demand. Just remember that term, consumer demand. Okay, without it, we're nowhere. But yes, so there's a lot of things you can leverage or use as collateral. And I typically in the consumer products good area, work with patents. And those patents are usually utility patents or design patents. Typically, typically though, utility patents are much more valuable, and they're much more difficult to I think to file and to make sure that you have something that's truly unique. And typically those are based upon building prototypes. So if you have a new approach, now obviously we've talked a little bit about services and goods and other things, but for actual products, you want to develop a prototype that actually functions. Okay, it's very important, folks. If it doesn't function, it doesn't work, you don't really have anything. So there's a lot of effort and work, and I'm sure we just heard about that too in the nautical world. But I think that once you get there and you build those prototypes and you figure out specifically mechanically, you turn it into a utility patent. And when you bring a utility patent to someone like myself who puts together licensing deals, you know, all the time for housewares and hardware manufacturers and so forth, the typical royalty rate, if you have a filed patent, now I'm going to describe that because we have provisional patent applications, PPAs, which are 12-month provisionals. That's okay. We'll talk to you. We'll listen. Typically, those have to be converted after 12 months into a non-provisional patent filing. Those are actually considerably more valuable because they actually include the specific claims. And then eventually, after a number of years, depending upon the process and the approach you take, you'll get an issued patent. Either a non-provisional or an issued patent typically can command somewhere between 2 and 7% royalty. And then the question of royalty rate based upon what? And that's usually the wholesale sales to retailers. Okay, so if, let's say, a Lifetime Brands produces a garlic press and it's a $10 cost, it's going to retail for $20, at Walmart or something. The royalty rate, 2 to 7%, would be based upon that $10. Okay, I don't want to get too complicated, but there are other things that get subtracted off that. But there's a net royalty rate, so you might make between 20 and 70 cents per unit. Typically, 2% is very low and 7% is quite high. A very good royalty rate is typically around 5%. Now, there's things that sometimes affect that negatively. If you don't have what they consider a strong patent, it might go down a little bit. If it's only a design patent, it's a lower rate. But if you have a strong utility patent, that's a typical rate that you might be for consumer goods. So you might be be something that you should look at and understand that that's a good rate before you start saying, I won 20% of the box and they never speak to you again. That's a pretty good rate.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you making the distinction between what typical rates might be for consumer goods and perhaps the sort of the upper range when it comes to sort of academic based or more technical or complex patents. But you mentioned something a moment ago, and I would like for Chinwe to weigh in on this. Warren mentioned the basically exclusive license. Actually, pardon me. Daniela mentioned she and her company have an exclusive license, and so that folks can understand what that really means as a term of art, and as opposed to a non-exclusive. Chinwe, can you speak to what those differences are?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And it's perfect because I think exclusivity is something that is even coming up in pop culture when you look at, influencers. Everyone's talking about what's exclusivity, right? Why does it matter? So the idea of exclusivity is when you're giving that right over to the third party who is purchasing this right. If it's exclusive, they're the only people who can exercise that right. And that's exclusive even to yourself, meaning now you can't exercise that right. So they're buying that control. If it's non-exclusive, then that means perhaps that you can sell it to them and you can sell it to somebody else, or you can sell it to them and you can exercise the right as well. And so it's really about who can control this particular asset for how long, in what territories or regions. Sometimes you see in other areas where exclusivity may be geographic. So they may say it's, I have an exclusive right in the Pacific Northwest, right? But maybe it's non-exclusive in other regions. And some of those terms when it comes to exclusivity is really driven by market, maybe business, maybe best practices in that particular industry. Because at the end of the day, the reason why someone would want exclusivity is you want to protect that investment that you've made, right? So if you're going to pay, for exclusivity, it's going to be at a premium because obviously you're restricting who has access to it. And you're doing that because you realize that if it's non-exclusive, you're really in competition with whoever else, has access to this asset. So exclusivity can be a really interesting thing to negotiate in licensing agreements, especially in different industries, because it allows you to weigh, some of the business considerations when you're trying to figure out how to leverage an asset.
Thank you for that. And I think that's a really appropriate segue back to Daniela regarding, again, referencing the exclusive patent you licensed. And I would love to hear from you. Your concept is quite a unique concept. And as you mentioned, there is a market need based upon some of the research and studies you conducted. So from a sort of a technician / businesswoman's perspective, what advantages is it to have this exclusive license, specifically for you? And if there are any disadvantages, would you share those as well?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And thank you for setting me up very well, Shinwei, so that I can kind of elaborate a little bit more. I would say it's a huge advantage for us. And this kind of circles back to the first, one of the first things that we mentioned, which is that because you're bringing something completely novel to the market, you have this incredible opportunity, but you're also taking on more risk. So I feel that having that exclusivity kind of protects us a little bit more because we have more hoops to jump through. We're a new ingredient, which means we need to be registered in all of the continents. We have to be submitted as a novel ingredient on the list of ingredients that exist. There's kind of all of these additional hoops that we have to jump through. And so it kind of buys us some time and gives us some protection as we bring this new ingredient to the market. And again, because we're the first ones that are getting this material into the hands of people to actually play with, if someone were to come back and say they didn't like it or something like that, we're taking on that extra risk. So having that moat around our business is really helpful. And of course, it's a huge competitive advantage considering the fact that now we're the only ones that anybody can purchase this from. And it gives us a lot of leverage as we're negotiating with our supply chain. It gives us leverage as we're negotiating contracts with our distributors. So I think it's a really powerful thing and it's a really unique thing. There are so many startups and so many businesses that don't have something that they can copyright or that they can patent. And while those are wonderful businesses as well, it just means you have to spend more of your focus on kind of the competition and standing out and being unique. So I think it's a huge advantage. It's something that we negotiated for very hard. And now we're also in the position that if we would like, we can always subcontract out to other people. So we have that right as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. And again, you guys are making my job really, really easy because you're setting up very nicely sort of the next place to go in terms of something you mentioned, Danielle. So you referenced the hoops really that you had to jump through in order to take on this exclusive license. You mentioned new materials and ingredients registrations. You mentioned risk. So with these variables as part of your equation, sort of your business equation, that seems like it may start to rack up expenses and costs. So Warren, for you, sort of, with those considerations in mind, for the layperson, how much would you say it would cost an asset owner? So whether that's content, coursework, a patent, a trademark, how much does it cost generally to license that asset?
Well, yeah, okay, I want to answer that, but I want to also just add something to exclusivity because I think it's important before we go on. By the way, there's also a price, and I'm sure that Danielle meant this or was referencing it, for exclusivity. And it also, sometimes you have to negotiate, if you're on the other side of the table from us, If you're an inventor, you want to make sure there's minimums involved and that the company has certain responsibilities to do a certain amount of volume over a certain period, a reasonable amount of time. And so there's also the issue of advances that come up too. So these are also things that you can negotiate and pine down and learn a little bit more about that go hand in hand with that. But as far as the cost, see, here's the thing: when you develop your product, and we're speaking to an audience now of product developers and inventors, you regardless of whether you want to go to market on your own or whether you want to license it, it's really the same beginning. You're coming up with the concept, you're turning it into a real object or a real service. You're figuring out all these technical things that have to be figured out in hoops. And you need to put a fair amount of money into all of that, into your research, into your prototypes, into your product development, into your IP filings, and all these things. Now, if I've heard one inventor say, I've heard a million say, I put 200,000. I mean, I've heard the number $200,000 so many times, I almost laughed. But there can be a significant amount of money, and that's one of the things that we talk about it when you want to profitably invent is to watch your expenses. Now, you don't want to cut corners. I will tell you right now that I look at thousands of products a year, and for those people that just sketch out something and send me an idea, it's going in the trash can. And yet I know that there's like inventor marketers who are saying to people, just send in an idea all the time. That doesn't work. But you do need to do some due diligence. You got to do some prototyping. You got to, these other hoops that are really important to look at, they cost time and money, but you got to budget your time and money carefully. This is a business at the end of the day to you. It has to be profitable. So instead of just throwing out hundreds of thousands of dollars, which some people do, maybe you could do it for $20,000 or $25,000. You got to look for sources. You got to educate yourself and get out there and find out different ways to do it. And then regardless of whether you want a license or not, that is a decision that's made down the road. Now, the farther along you are and the better prototype you've built and better patents that you've filed, you're going to be way up the food chain and way up the ladder when it comes to licensing, when you get to talking to someone like me that's analyzing your product. And it can really go a long way towards getting a more profitable deal for you. So it's all, a risk and reward, but you're going to have to spend some money to get in the game. There is a barrier to entry into most of this stuff, but at the end of the day, you can control some of your expenses, and you have to choose your choices very wisely. Where am I putting my money? Where am I traveling to trade shows? Where am I going to meet people? What companies are? These are all things that you have to, put into your equation. So if you just think you got an idea and are going to send it in, you're probably going to fail right out of the box. But if you weigh these things carefully and think about them, you'll get better at it. It might be helpful.
Awesome. Thank you. And again, piggybacking on a couple components you included in your response. Number one was references to inventor marketers, or as we in the intellectual property space, we refer to them sort of as third-party service providers. We've been, at home and have seen the commercials offering to either patent your invention or to license or market your invention. Again, being referenced as third-party services. So I say that to say there has been some discussion / controversy, if you will, around whether or not it's a good idea to utilize those services. And then, so Chinwe, I would like for you to address that question along with whether or not a content creator or inventor needs, whether or not it's required, if you will, to have a lawyer do this work for them or negotiate these deals for them. So that's sort of a compound question, but I see the relationship and I would love for you to address it.
I'm happy to answer this question because a number of my clients come to me after working with some of these entities. So I think that there's a wonderful benefit to democratizing information and education through platforms like YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. I think, these are great places where people are getting just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to new industries and what's possible. And I think that that's fantastic. But I just caution people to equate that to someone who has spent almost 2 decades in school and has a license and has past experience and sort of has the industry knowledge to guide you. That is a very different level of expertise and understanding. And and I'm not just saying this because I'm a lawyer, because trust me, when I went into law school and when I graduated, I would say I was a completely different person. And a lot of that is the molding of, the way you think, and the way that you sort of perceive the world, not even just the law itself. And I think that that's an invaluable perspective. And at least in my practice, there's a difference for my clients when they come to me and we have a discussion about, an asset that they're developing. And I'll give you a quick example. There was a young woman who came to me who wanted to trademark an asset. She had gone from doing a service for clients at a very premium level, but realized there was a bit of a liability attached to her doing it for the client and decided she wanted to take a step back from doing that and develop a system that she could teach the company to do themselves. And so she wanted to trademark the name of this system. And I asked her, I said, I think that's fantastic, but do you have a strategy to increase the value of this trademark over time so that it's not just tied to this one service that you're, providing? And so we sat there and we brainstormed, and this was the first time she was thinking about this asset as something that can grow, that can increase in value over time, and that can have multiple iterations and versions just off of the name, this one, brand name. And I gave her the example of, like Maybelline. When Maybelline started, it was one product, but as they added additional products, additional services, right, the value of that brand grew over time. So it's important to work with an attorney and not necessarily someone who's in the sales position or the marketing position, because an attorney is looking at it from the perspective of a portfolio. A portfolio of IP assets is incredibly powerful for growing your brand over time. And if you're intentional and you have the right support, you can do that and see dividends, over time. But if you're not intentional and you don't have someone looking at it from that perspective, you might actually make really critical mistakes that could undermine the value of your asset over time. So I think that in the short run, it seems like, oh man, lawyers are expensive. But in the long run, if you really think about the expertise and the value add that you're going to get from someone who's an expert, who's gone through this, you'll see that it actually ends up making you money down the line. So that would be, hopefully I answered both questions.
You did, and very well, I might add, and you touched on really leveraging the collective expertise of folks who have experience in these areas, whether it is sort of the substantive subject matter area, as well as the transactional experience. And so that made me think about how transformation happens when it comes to the types of ways or processes for leveraging intellectual property assets. And that really puts me sort of in the next segment or group of questions I wanted to touch on, basically bringing the topic.
Cherise, can I hate to interrupt, but can I just add
Sure.
one more thing before
Absolutely.
we go on to the next plateau? Legal services are very valuable and worth a lot. And by the way, lawyers like Cherise actually have law degrees. What I was referring to before are these people that sell air, okay? And they're these invention marketers who in some ways prey on inventors and try to sell them services that they don't necessarily need. And I would just say that it's a completely, they show up in the middle of the night and some of them claim expertise, which doesn't exist. And it's a big reason why I wrote my book. And so you have to be careful for them, and you have to make sure you ask the questions, what is it that you're providing? What is the value in it? And what have you done before? And by the way, some of them are obviously, jokers, but some of them are very subtle about it. And if you're going to get outside help, because inventors are incredibly naive, really make sure that you ask the question, have they had other profitable inventions before, not just, help people down the road. So I hate to interrupt, but I want to clearly separate those folks from the wonderful work that Charisse does or Xinhua does.
May I add as well? And
Sure,
just to
please.
say that the lawyers that we work with have been probably the most important asset to us. So I would say don't cut corners. I don't know, Xinhui, how your firm works, but there are a number of firms that specifically work with startups. So our payments were deferred until we actually secured the license agreement. So we did not pay a single penny for 2 years while our legal team fought for us to get the IP. And they are the ones that are going to be negotiating all of the royalty amounts, the minimum annual fees, just all of the things that maybe don't seem like they matter at the beginning, but will eat into your profit margins down the line. So it's worth it. I love, love, love all of the lawyers who have helped us. So thank you, Xinhui.
Well, perfect. Thank you both, Warren and Daniela, for adding that extra piece of information, because I think that is very helpful, in particular for any of our audience members who are lay people who are sort of new to this space and new to some of the language we tend to use in this space. And so I was touching on a moment ago a topic related to sort of transformation. And so Xinhui, you addressed how the process can be transformed in terms of the models that law firms use when engaging with their clients. Daniela, you just spoke to a similar sort of transformation in terms of the industry, because that was not always the case in terms of law firms' willingness to sort of defer payments. And so, as I was referencing a moment ago, the concept of transformation applies also to sort of the receiving end. And it's related, but a slight topic change. And I want to loop in Warren again on this one. One of the things that is probably more recent in terms of changes in the industry relates to student athletes and their ability to receive payment for use of their likenesses and images by their colleges and universities. I'm not sure if you've had any, Warren or Xinhui, have had specific clients where you've negotiated some of those deals, but as a practitioner, if you will, tell us about that change and how that relationship or those relationships relate to licensing.
Well, I hope I didn't cut Danielle's time off. I didn't mean to jump in there before, but I will just say this. I'm not an expert on this arena, but I do read about it. I'm a huge sports fan, and I personally think it's absolutely awesome that these students and these athletes can trade in on their own name, because guess what? Just like everybody else, I don't know if you're aware of this in America, there's a few people that seem to get everything they want in this country and kind of own the place, and everybody else, is subservient to them. And in this case, it was the NCAA, who was like literally profiting from selling jerseys that had Johnny Manziel's name on the back. And meanwhile, Johnny Manziel wasn't making a dime off of it. And they said, well, we give you a free college education. Well, la-di-da, he could be making millions, and if he was able to do that. So I think this whole new world of understanding that, and it really brings home, I think, also to younger folks, the value of intellectual property that exists in a lot of different ways, that you are unique. You are a unique individual. This is what this is all about. The whole USPTO is to protect individuals and individual rights, so that big organizations, big companies, big folks can't just run you over. I know Elon Musk said patents are for the weak. Well, yeah, he's right. We are weak. Okay, this is who we are. We're trying to get off the ground here. We have things that we own. We shouldn't be, just the product and service of someone else that owns it for us. So I think it's all awesome. I'm sure the other panelists have more to say on it, but I'm 100% behind it.
Awesome. Xinhui, would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, so I think that this is a really interesting development for a couple of reasons. For me, I think about intellectual property as a form of social justice, and I'll explain what I mean by that. I think that IP is one of those properties that is so dependent on individual creativity, individual imagination, that anyone is capable of inventing, creating, bringing about something incredible to benefit society. But I think that where the challenge is particular individuals, communities, aren't aware of that power, and so they can't exercise it. They don't have the education or the information to leverage it. But once you give a community that has historically, systematically, continuously created for centuries the knowledge that this work has value and you can protect it and you can write your name in the annals of history literally by registering this invention, it changes the narrative and it changes the entire discussion. So when you talk about a young kid who grew up, without the resources to pay for an education, who gets a scholarship to go play a sport, that doesn't have to be the end of that particular transformation. It can actually be the beginning of a complete transformation, not just for that child, but also their community. And so name, image, and likeness is not just about a couple of dollars in someone's bank account. It's the ability to leverage that individual personal creativity, however it's expressed, to some form of economic development, and eventually, with the right resources, a future that isn't tied necessarily to that sport or ecosystem. And I think that's the powerful linkage between intellectual property, what's happening at the NCAA, and this new generation of entrepreneurs who are doing incredible things. So the key is giving the information and the education so that people can leverage this incredible, ability to create in so many different ways so that they can better themselves in their own communities. That's why small business owners are champions in the United States, because they are willing to take the risk and build something. And when they build it, they hire other people. It's a ripple effect. And I think that if given the right resources and the ecosystem is supportive, these young students will be able to do the very same thing.
Oh my God, that was unbelievable. Please take that and frame it and put it out there. You couldn't have been better said. Thank you.
I totally agree, Warren. And Chinwe, you just in terms of the contributions, this new generation of creators and contributors to our collective intellectual property, collective body of intellectual property, I think is spot on. And in fact, I want to share this statistic that I learned recently from a July 2022 article published by the BIO organization, or Biotechnology Industry Organization. And it basically referenced that the licensing of academic patents contributed up to $1.9 trillion to the US economy, and supported up to 6.5 million jobs in the last 25 years. That is huge. And mind you, we're just talking about academic patents. And so if we extrapolate, to your point, Chinwe, we're really on the cusp, really not on the cusp, we're sort of in the midst of some transformative and life-changing opportunities. And so I'm looking at our time, we're at the end, but I wanted to make sure we left our audience with some helpful tools and information in terms of resources. for all of us, whether we were practitioners as former examiners or on the client side of the equation, or as a licensor of technologies from academic laboratories, we've all had access to and have utilized various resources available to us. Some of them are, free or at no cost. One of the, the big places, of course, is the organization that I represent, the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, and using tools like the IP identifier, which is a new tool that people can use to help figure out the type of intellectual property asset they may have. And that references back to your initial conversation, Chinwe, in terms of figuring out what you have. Also, one has the ability to search for patents or what we call prior art, search the trademark database to see if pre-existing trademarks exist on something that they've created. We also have patent and trademark resource centers. So outside, though, of those resources through the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, if you could share resources that you used when you were getting started. Daniela, I would love to start with you, and Chinwe, you next, and Warren, if you could finish, that would be great.
Well, first and foremost, to anybody that is new to starting a business, there are tons of local accelerators in whatever city it is you live in. And if you have a full-time job and you just have a few hours, there are part-time accelerators. But I would say to look one up in your area and try to enroll in it, because it's really a crash course in everything from understanding the market landscape, comparing yourself to competition, positioning yourself, and pitching. And pitching and being able to tell your story, I think, is one of the most important things as a business owner. Whether it's pitching to investors or to customers, you have to be able to sell your story. So just on a very kind of basic level, as a new entrepreneur, I would say to look up what services are in your area. I would also strongly advise that you don't quit your day job until you have raised funds, because there is a lot of risk. It's a lot of work. And one of the things that I regret is that I didn't continue with my kind of full-time job at the beginning. So hold on to that income as long as you can while you're fundraising. And then there's also really good resources online for writing just a traditional business plan, which can be a very daunting task for anyone who is opening just, a brick and mortar shop in your town to a digital asset or an ingredient like us. You're going to need to write a business plan. Ours was like 40 pages. It was something I had never done before, very daunting. There's a lot of services online that can help you just with those basic fundamentals of starting a business. So those are my suggestions. And grants, grant money, anything that you can apply for to get free funding is a win.
Yes, Michelson.
Awesome. Thank you. Chinwe.
So I concur with everything that Danielle said. I think she's spot on. The other thing that I would suggest is, so the institute that I'm working with, Michelson Institute for Intellectual Property, we have a resource page for innovators, entrepreneurs to learn about intellectual property. I think the beginning of this entire conversation is really understanding this ecosystem. And it doesn't have to be intimidating. I know that it can seem very intimidating, even in law school, right? For those of us who are learning this stuff, it feels abstract and intimidating. But once you get over the language, you'll understand that it's really just, we're talking about creation, invention, and, expression. And once you sort of figure that out, it's very easy to sort of navigate the space. So I would strongly suggest Michelson's, resource hub is a place to sort of get that basic information. Another organization that can be helpful for those who are starting out is called SCORE. It's an organization that helps small business owners. Sometimes you can get a mentor. People from different industries can support you. And these are typically people who maybe have retired and they were working in the corporate world. And so now they're giving back by, mentoring young entrepreneurs. And then the other thing I would say that can be a resource are the professionals that you choose to partner with on this journey. There are a number of my clients who, we start out with, I would like to set up a business, and it turns into a whole conversation about, what is this business? What are the things you're thinking about? How do you want to grow it? Because believe it or not, those will impact things like what kind of entity you're going to set up, in what state, the permits and licenses that are going to be required to run this business. And so I tell my clients all the time, it doesn't have to be me. It can be another attorney, but I need you to get a relationship with an attorney that's invested in your business, because those professionals who have that expertise and that perspective, you'd be surprised. They have their own network, they have their own community, and you might be getting a whole team of supporters just by plugging into one or two professionals. And, when I have a client, our firm, we go to bat for them. So if you need a resource, I'm looking around too. It's not just about the transactional, I do a service for you, you pay my fees. I really invest in my clients because I'm invested in their long-term growth. So I think that at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're working with people that believe in you and want to see you grow and want to see you succeed. And while services like, the online legal services can be helpful and they may seem less expensive, you're just not going to get that from them. It's going to be a transaction. And then when things go up in smoke or you realize there's an issue, they're not going to be there to pick up the phone and answer those questions and troubleshoot with you. So don't forget that there's no substitute for a human being, right? That heartbeat, it matters. That mindset, it matters. That passion, it matters. So make sure that you're getting with people who are aligned with you, because they'll run the race with you.
Beautifully said, Chinwe, and thank you for that. Warren, you mentioned at the top of the discussion your book, Inventor Confidential. So I know that's one resource that's out there. Tell us a little bit about what's in that book and if there are any other resources.
Sure. So first of all, I'm so impressed with the panel today. I wish I was half as smart as they were when I was there. I'd really be so much farther along today. But so I'll go. Yeah, I was going to list my book last, but I'll go there first since you mentioned it. So I did spend a lot of years trying to figure this industry out. I've learned a lot along the way. My mission statement, I remember spending a couple of days in my mission statement years ago thinking, what do I really want to do when I grow up? And I decided to simplify it because I was having a hard time and just said, I just want to meet the 200 coolest people in America, and then I'll figure out the rest of the things from there. But I learned a lot by trying to reach out and socialize in every possible way of connect with all the communities and research and learn. And I ended up putting time into writing a book. A friend of mine said, you got to write a book. He said this for like 5 years. I didn't have time to write a book. I was too busy living life and trying to accomplish things, but eventually sat down and spent a couple of years. And half of the book is very much dedicated specifically to inventors about what you need to do functionally and mechanically to get where you want to go. And then the other half of the book is filling in, all the things you have to be worried about. So it's called Inventor Confidential. It's a fairly easy read, and you can refer to a lot of the basic stuffs in there. So I would say that. Number two, the United Inventors Association, which I spent 14 years dedicating myself to a 501c3 nonprofit and a lot of my resources and money. First of all, you can go on their website, uiausa.org, uiausa.org. By the way, we were born out of the United States Patent and Trademark Office in the early 1990s. So we have a very proud history. There are unbelievable video collection there that you can go on and access. and learn from entrepreneurs and successful people and all types of things, which is great. The other wonderful thing that the UIA does is it runs inventor pavilions at trade shows. And it's something that I really got involved with early on and had the vision for. There used to be these national inventor shows and nobody went to them. And they were in, East Oshkosh, nowhere. And so we went to the hardware show and said, can we set up an inventor pavilion? They said, yes. We went to Housewares, we went to golf show, Super Zoo pet shows, lawn and garden shows, all these things. So now we have inventor pavilions with many, many booths, sometimes over 100 booths, educational forums and all. And it's really worthwhile if you're inventing consumer goods products to go out to one of these shows, whatever industry it is that you want to exploit. So if you have a housewares product, if you have a hardware, go to the show, spend 2 or 3 days, walk the shows, meet companies, meet people, find out what's going on there, be educated. So the UIA does an unbelievable job in that. And then the last thing is I've had 9 businesses in my life. Some of them have been very successful and some of them haven't. Not to mention my snow plowing and window washing businesses when I was in high school and college. But my last run here is going to be with a partner starting a company called Market Blast. And we've been working on this for a couple of years, but we just launched it this past year. So if you go on marketblast.com, we already have about 100 companies on the platform that are taking outside submissions, and you can connect with directly. There's no cost involved and for the company either. And we're just trying to connect people. People, especially men, always say, well, how are you going to make your money? Well, where we're going to make our money eventually is if we build the platform to a big enough platform that has use, and we want to get to thousands of companies. We have about 5,000 or 6,000 inventors early on in the platform now, but we want to get to hundreds of thousands. And then when we have a platform that big, then we'll be able to go back and give people advice and charge for things that we're not doing now. But we do have an advanced program, membership platform. It's not particularly expensive, but it does allow access to a database of over 20,000 companies that we have assimilated by category that allows you to go on and put in keywords and be able to do that. And Shinwa, we're going to be coming to attorneys at some point, probably in the summer or fall, to let you guys know, because you guys do unbelievable work, and usually you have to charge for it. It's hard to do back end. But if you could at least pass on information to your clients, sometimes it can be very helpful. We're going to be very involved in the pro bono platform of giving free access to people who otherwise don't have access to the innovation ecosystem. I do completely agree with your social justice comments before, and had a chance to interview Sheila Jackson Lee and hear about John Lewis and the social justice movement and how it pertains to inventors. But we want to be a part of that. We want to be a part of trade shows. We want to be a part of all these things, and basically give information and resources to people who are motivated to go out and find it. So they don't have to pay, or they don't have to get, BS, peddled to them by people that, otherwise haven't had really any success themselves. So I know it's a handful there, but those are a couple of resources that people can, United Inventors Association, Inventor Confidential, and Market Blast might be helpful to people.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much to Warren, Chinwe, and Daniela. This has been a most engaging and exciting conversation. And we really appreciate your thought leadership in this space. And we're super excited about the energy and the focus on intellectual property awareness, engagement, and access. And you 3 have definitely helped add to that today. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks, Cherise. Thank you, Mac. You did great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.